Hey guys, how's it going? Today we have a big video ahead of us. This is about the new crash guard that I just got from Rally Raid. It fits the CB500X model 2019 and onwards, so it even fits the latest model, the 2022. So it's a very beefy piece. I chose this one over some others that were available that were also cheaper because it has both this plate at the bottom and a little bit at the front, and later on we're going to add another part here that will protect the front of the engine and also the oil filter. And it also has these parts which will act as engine guards, so it's a mix between the engine guard here and a bash plate at the bottom. So it's kind of why I like this one, and also it looks very sturdy, it looks very well finished, and it's probably going to protect adequately the bike, unlike some other options that seem to be a little thin and maybe a little too finicky. So it's already scratched here for some reason, maybe during transport because I had a bunch of tools in the bag with it. So yeah, in this video I'm going to show you how to install this, and I will give you some first impressions of how it feels on the bike and what it looks like, and if I feel that it can really protect the bike or not. So let's go. So the first thing to do is, of course, to print out and read the manual. They do have a couple pages of manual on how to install the thing with relatively well explained steps, and also some pictures every time to follow along. There's just 19 steps, so it should be relatively easy. It also gives you the list of tools that you're going to need for the installation. And obviously, normally you do this in a garage, but you know, I'm not just like the other kids. So the first thing to do is to remove the protection of the catalytic converter, which is, as you can see, plastic and a little flimsy, and that is not going to survive actual hits from rocks. So you take an M5 Allen key and start undoing it. So for this step, it's very important to just keep the washers here and here. You have a rubber washer on this side, on the external side, and you have a steel washer on the inside. These are very important to keep because we're going to reuse them with the new part from Rally Raid. So we can just put them side by side, and you see that this one is the original one in plastic, and this one is made of aluminum, I think. And so it is pure solid aluminum, and this is just a protective layer, and we're just going to fit it like this, and it's going to be protecting the catalytic converter of the exhaust much better than this default plastic part. It also covers more surface, as you can see, especially at the top. So the technique to remove the rubber part here is that you need to push the screw in first of all, and then it's going to be much easier to remove everything else. So first, this metallic part, the washer, which is more like a T than a washer, and then you have to push the screw in, and then you will be able to remove this. So there, you just push the screw in. Takes a little bit of effort at first, and then you can just squish the rubber part through the remaining hole, and ta-da! Then it's about just placing the rubber parts into the new protective plate, like so. These metal washers need to go on the inside, so it's better to prepare that, put them in beforehand, and then you can just approach it and start screwing. So in the manual, they do recommend to use some kind of Loctite or some kind of locking glue, which is something like this. This is not Loctite, but it's going to do fine. And so the way you're going to want to do this is to drop a little bit of it. No need to overdo it. This is not going to be very tight. It is going to vibrate a little bit, so it's better to have some of it. Just like that, just a little bit. This is just more than enough to prevent the whole thing from vibrating away. So you could just screw it in, but without locking it up, as always. So there is here a separation, and it is shown to be a little bent on their photo. So I'm assuming that it's okay if it's not entirely aligned. Like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. And there you go. Now you have a much better protection. So now we're going to need to move to the scary bit, which is going to be unmounting this screw and the same one on the other side that bolts directly into the engine block. So it's basically what holds the engine in the frame. So this is the part of the frame, then it just goes through the engine, and then the engine is mounted on the other side. And we say that on this bike the engine is a stress member, which means that there is no classic cradle that goes all around the engine, and the engine is not really resting on this cradle. It is part of the chassis. So this is why you need to be really careful about this part, because you do not want to cross thread this bolt, because it's just going directly into aluminum, and if you mess that up, then it's going to be very hard to recuperate. So really be careful about this. This is one of the more complicated parts of this build. We're just going to start unscrewing this part. So when you remove the bolt, you get one of these washers that is sitting behind, in between the frame and the engine. You're gonna have to keep this safe, because we're gonna replace this with one of they call the billets. So these are the billets. Let me just open that. So this is what a billet looks like, and you have to be careful because they are marked. And there is one for the right side and another one for the left side, and they're not exactly the same. So be sure you use the right one for the right side. So apply some Loctite to the bolt and just slide the part in from the bottom like this, and then just gently start screwing the screw in by hand. This is a very important part. I'm insisting on that because you really don't want to cross thread anything. So do it by hand, and if it's slightly difficult, you're doing it wrong. So if it's slightly difficult, just go back, unscrew it in, and just try to find the right thing again. So as you can see right now, it's not really compressing anything. This is normal because the frame is kind of pushing it like this outwards. So when we're gonna tighten it, then this is gonna stop moving. Onto the other side. So the bolt that we're gonna do is this one right here. There you go. And so you have to repeat the same operation on this side. So the billet is going to sit like this. Make sure it's the left one for the left side, and it slides in from below. Then you add a little bit of the glue and then screw it back in. Right, at this stage, it's important that you do not tighten this one and the other one fully so that you can still adjust the billet when you're going to fit the plate underneath. The next step is going to be to use a 10mm head to unscrew this screw on the engine guard to remove the pivot pin so that we can just install the crash guard underneath the bike using the pivot pin. And make sure you don't lose any of the parts. So you have a nut, you have a washer, and you have the screw itself. Then you can just slide the whole pivot. Now normally they tell you to grease it freely. I don't have any grease, so that's just gonna go dry, and we'll see what happens. So for this step, we're going to make sure that we don't get any of the cables or conducts or anything that is underneath the bike. I also am using a piece of wood to stabilize the bike because I'm on very uneven terrain, so that's probably not what you're going to want to do if you do this yourself. These things are everywhere and they really sting. Very good to eat though, because you're going to want to approach it so that it mostly lines up. And then we're going to use the pin to actually put it in place. Right here. From left side to right side. Just slide it. And then wiggle it to make sure that it just gets through onto the other side. Once it is mostly positioned here, as you can see, it's just laying down on the ground here, and it's just being held by the pin on the rear side. Then you just have to make the holes line up here and use this bolt assembly to finish it and tighten it. So for this screw, there's no need to put the Loctite glue because it is an auto-locking nut, so you don't actually have to bother. And as always, don't tighten it too much as long as not everything is in place. The next step is going to be to approach the engine guard with the billet that we just installed earlier. You can see here it doesn't actually quite line up, but it's okay because this is completely loose. So I'm going to adjust it first. And for this, you're going to use the provided M10 screw. It's 25mm long and it needs a head of 17mm. It just works, guys. It just works. Just approach it, then start screwing it in, always by hand, making sure that you're not cross-threading anything. So now I just leave a little bit of wiggle room, well, that's even a lot of wiggle room, so that I can do the other side, and then I can start to adjust everything the way I want. Okay, so now is the time to tighten everything. Now you could just wiggle it a little bit so that you can get the best alignment you can. Once you're happy with how everything is aligned, you need to tighten these bolts that are in the billets that were provided with the kit to 35 Newton meters. So to do that, you're gonna need a torque wrench, and I've got a very cheap model here from Amazon. You just need to make it to 35. Here goes nothing. Okay, so that should be okay. And now we have to repeat the operation, but with the bolts that go directly into the engine, and this time we're going to use 40 Newton meters. I just realized that just before I was just showing the foot-pound scale. There are two scales on this one, and you should really use the Newton meters one because the specification is in Newton meters. So it actually feels like a really gentle pressure, to be honest. It's not that tight, but I think that initially these bolts are supposed to be rated at 35 Newton meters from Honda's manual, but when you install this bash plate, Rally Raid recommends 40 Newton meters, so I'm just going to use what Rally Raid tells us to do. I guess that they know their stuff. And since we're just at some part, maybe it makes sense to just want to tighten this a little more. And the last step to secure the main bash plate is to just tighten this little bolt that I just approached just before, but isn't actually fully tightened. The last part is to install the cover here that will protect the oil filter from all the protections that come from the tire. And trust me, there are a lot of these. So first and foremost, in order to install this part, you're gonna need these screws. You will just put one like this, not forgetting about the washer on the other side and the auto locking nut. Of course, it really helps when the pipes are actually cold. At the beginning of this process, they were hot, but now they have had time to cool off, so it's much more convenient to do it at the end anyways. So there it is, the CB500X equipped with a new crash guard that protects both the engine and the bottom of the engine and the side of the engine, I should say, and also the oil filter at the front. So overall it took me about, I don't know, an hour and a half because I'm just filming, but if you're not filming stuff, in half an hour is going to be done. Really, it's super easy. You can't really make any kind of mistake. Well, I did one mistake though. The bolt over here, they said tighten fully, and I did tighten fully, and even a little more than fully. And I just ended up breaking it. It just sheared off. So be gentle, like I said, with these little nuts and bolts because they're a tiny bit fragile. But maybe I just overdid it. So I'm just gonna go and buy a replacement, and I'm just gonna fix this. Right now it's just holding with a cable tie. It should be okay, even under vibration. It's gonna be fine. So yeah, now I'm just gonna go for a little ride with it. The sun is setting, as you can see, so we're gonna get some pretty cool shots, and I'm gonna tell you what I think about it. That's it. Thanks for watching.
So in terms of weight, it's about 3.5 kilos, but since it sits so low on the bike, it's hard to tell it's even there. One thing that bothers me is how much the ground clearance is reduced when the bash plate is fitted to the CB500X. Having a good ground clearance under the bike is crucial in more challenging off-road environments. I'll try to see if it's possible to better adjust the whole assembly so that it sits closer to the engine.